Have you ever looked at someone and felt like you knew that person from somewhere? Not from this world, perhaps, but from some other corner of memory, where souls recognize each other before names are even exchanged. There's something strange, almost disturbing about that feeling. Because logic says you're too different, that you live in separate universes, that this connection makes no sense at all. And yet, it exists. It grows. It insists, as if the heart doesn't care about social rules, about bank accounts, about what the world will say, as if loving were the simplest and most revolutionary thing someone can do. There's a lie they tell us from early on that love needs to make sense, that it needs to be approved, validated, fitted into acceptable molds. But the truth, that raw truth that hurts and liberates at the same time, is that love doesn't ask permission. It doesn't check last names, doesn't verify bank balances, doesn't ask if you're ready before arriving. It simply happens. And when it happens between two people the world insists on keeping apart, that's when it becomes dangerous. Because love that challenges structures always bothers those who built those structures, and it always forces those who feel it to make a choice: obey the world or obey the heart. This is the story of Aurora and Ethan. She, a young woman who entered a mansion to survive, carrying in her hands the weight of all the choices she never had. He, an heir born in a golden cage, suffocated by expectations he never asked to carry. Two worlds, two solitudes, one connection nobody expected, not even themselves. And what happens when you finally find someone who truly sees you, but the entire world says you can't be together? What do you do when loving means losing everything you know? When choosing your heart means giving up security? This story won't give you easy answers. It won't sell you a fairy tale where everything resolves with a kiss and a happy ending wrapped with a bow. Because life doesn't work that way. Especially when you dare to feel something that goes against everything you were taught to believe. But what this story will give you is something more valuable. The reminder that feeling is worth it, that being seen, even if just for a moment, even if it costs dearly, is better than spending your whole life invisible. And that sometimes the greatest courage isn't fighting against the world, it's fighting for someone, even when the entire world is against you. So, take a deep breath, let your heart open a little, and come with me on this journey about two people who dared to ask the most dangerous question of all. What if we chose love, even knowing it's going to hurt? There was something in Aurora's fingers that translated all the distance between two worlds. The simple cloth she held, white, worn at the edges, damp from so much scrubbing, seemed to carry the weight of everything she was. Discreet, necessary, invisible. She cleaned the cold marble of the Moreau mansion entrance like someone erasing traces of their own existence, moving in silence so as not to disturb the distant shine that Ethan inherited without ever asking. He was there, on the second floor, looking out the window like someone observing the world from inside an aquarium, close enough to see, too far to touch. Between them, mahogany stairs and centuries of history that insisted on reminding, you don't belong to the same place. But belonging is a strange word, isn't it? Sometimes we feel displaced in the most familiar places, and suddenly, in a strange room, in an unexpected glance, something inside us recognizes, I know who you are, even without ever having seen you before. Aurora felt this every time she crossed paths with Ethan in the corridors, a sensation that he also carried something heavy, something that all the money in the world couldn't take off his shoulders. She knew what it was to carry. She knew what it was to wake up early, work until your hands hurt, smile when you didn't feel like it, exist in spaces where nobody really sees you. And maybe that's why, when his eyes landed on her, not with pity, not with contempt, but with an almost fragile curiosity, Aurora felt that someone finally saw beyond the cloth in her hands. How many times have you felt like you didn't belong somewhere until someone truly saw you? Not with that quick, functional look that measures usefulness, but with that look that stops, that hesitates, that lingers a second longer and leaves something in the air, a silent question, a mutual recognition, a small crack in the wall that separates two universes. That's how it began. Not with grand gestures or impossible promises, but with small stolen moments between the weight of expectations and the day's exhaustion. Aurora adjusted the library cushions while Ethan pretended to read. She passed by with the tea tray, and he thanked her, not like someone thanking for a service, but like someone thanking for presence. And in this almost imperceptible detail, something began to grow. Something delicate, dangerous, inevitable. Everything seemed to grow in silence until the secret came out, because silence, no matter how comfortable, never lasts forever. There's always someone paying too much attention. There's always a look that sees what it shouldn't, a half-open door, a poorly disguised sigh. And when the secret finally escaped, when Helena Moreau discovered that the Heir son was getting close to the Maid, their entire world collapsed. Not with a crash, but with that kind of silent violence that only wealthy families know how to exercise. Cutting words said in low tones, decisions made without consultation, distances imposed as if they were natural. Aurora was removed, Ethan was pressured, and between them grew an abyss made of fear, shame, and the question neither could answer. Is it worth fighting for something the whole world insists is wrong? There are encounters that happen not because destiny wanted them, but because two people were too tired of pretending they were okay. Aurora Silva didn't plan to work in a mansion. She planned to finish her studies, help her mother, maybe find a job where she could use her head, not just her hands. But life has a way of rewriting plans with a red pen. And when the electric bill was late for the third time, when her mother's medicine became more expensive than rent, Aurora understood that dreams need to wait, survival doesn't. That's how she crossed the Moreau Mansion gate for the first time, with her worn backpack and her heart tight with fear. Fear of making mistakes, of not being good enough, of being just another passing shadow in a place where even the walls seemed to judge who you were. Ethan Moreau, on the other hand, never needed to cross gates. He was born on the inside. He grew up surrounded by marble, crystal, and expectations that weighed more than any inheritance. Only child, heir to an empire he never asked to command, Ethan lived in a kind of golden prison where everything was perfect except the freedom to be who he really was. He studied at the best schools, attended the right dinners, smiled in family photos that graced business magazines. But inside, Ethan carried a loneliness so deep that sometimes he caught himself looking at the sky through his bedroom window, wishing to be anyone, anywhere, except himself. He didn't know what hunger was, but he knew what emptiness was. And emptiness, curiously, doesn't choose social class. Sometimes two completely different people recognize each other by the type of loneliness they carry. It's not the loneliness of someone who's physically alone. It's that loneliness of someone who's surrounded, but invisible. Aurora felt this every time she served dinner and nobody looked at her. Ethan felt this every time they talked about him, never with him. She existed to serve. He existed to inherit. And in the middle of all this, in the tight space between obligation and invisibility, the two began to realize that maybe they weren't so different after all. Because deep down, really deep down, what unites people isn't having the same life, it's having the same exhaustion. It's looking in the mirror and not recognizing who's on the other side. It's waking up and pretending everything's fine when all you wanted was for someone to ask, "Are you really okay?" This story isn't just about romance. It's not about a fairy tale where the poor girl wins the rich prince and everything resolves with a kiss. This story is about two people who learned to breathe in a suffocating world, who found courage in small gestures, who chose to feel even knowing that feeling hurts. It's about uncomfortable growth, about pain that teaches, about courage that's built gradually, not with grand speeches, but with silent decisions made in the middle of the night when nobody's watching. It's about Aurora learning that she's worth more than the work she does, and about Ethan discovering that inheriting a name doesn't mean giving up yourself. It's about both of them understanding, each in their own way, that the biggest risk isn't losing yourself in the other, it's never finding yourself.
Aurora's first day at the Moreau mansion was like entering a museum after hours, everything too beautiful to be touched, everything too silent to seem real. She arrived at 6 in the morning when the sun was still a promise behind the garden trees and was received by the housekeeper, a woman with a serious face who explained the rules with the same coldness of someone reading an instruction manual. Don't speak unless asked. Don't look directly at family members. Don't leave traces of your presence. Aurora listened to everything with held breath, her fingers squeezing the backpack strap as if that were the only real thing she still possessed. And then, when she was taken to the maid's room, a cramped cubicle at the back of the house with a single bed and a window facing the wall, she sat on the edge of the mattress and let out a sigh that carried everything she couldn't say aloud. I don't belong in this place. Have you ever felt this? That feeling of being completely out of place? As if every movement of yours were wrong, every word of yours sounded strange, every breath of yours was too loud? It's the kind of discomfort that sticks to your skin, that makes you walk on tiptoes even when nobody's watching, that transforms the simple act of existing into an exhausting performance. Aurora felt this at the first breakfast she served. She entered the dining room carrying the silver tray, warm croissants, imported jams, freshly squeezed orange juice, and placed everything on the table with slightly trembling hands. Helena Moreau didn't even lift her eyes from the newspaper. Vitar Moreau grumbled something about the coffee being lukewarm, and Ethan looked at her. It wasn't a long look, nor dramatic. It was just a second longer than necessary. But in that second, Aurora felt as if someone had turned on a light in a dark room. She was like someone trying to tidy a room where they were never invited to sit. Each movement of hers was careful, calculated, invisible. She wiped the mahogany shelves without touching the books. She folded the linen towels without leaving creases. She cleaned the mirrors until they reflected only the shine, never her own reflection. Aurora had learned early to be useful without being noticed, to exist in the backstage of other people's lives, to accept that her place was always on the outside. But there was something in that look from Ethan, something she couldn't name, but that bothered her in a strange, almost sweet way, that made her wonder for the first time in a long time if maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be seen, not as the girl who cleans, not as the efficient maid, but as Aurora. Just Aurora, the girl who liked to read in hiding, who daydreamed while washing dishes, who hummed softly when she thought nobody was listening. Ethan, on the other hand, experienced the opposite shock. He was used to people who talked too much, always wanting something, always measuring words, always performing. His mother, Elena, was a masterpiece of control. Every gesture calculated, every smile rehearsed. Every conversation a negotiation disguised as affection. His father, Vitor, was worse. He saw his son as an extension of the surname, as a piece on a corporate chessboard, never as a person. And his friends? Those the family approved of were soulless replicas, young heirs who talked about investments and travels like talking about the weather. Ethan was tired of smiling when he didn't feel like having it,
or tired of pretending interest in empty conversations, or tired of waking up in huge rooms and feeling there was no space for him to breathe. And then Aurora appeared, silent, discreet, almost invisible. But there was something about her, in the way she bit her lower lip when concentrated, in the way her eyes shone when she thought nobody was listening, that made Ethan want to pause, want to ask, want to know who was that girl who tidied his house, but who seemed to carry an entire universe inside her. The approach between Aurora and Ethan didn't happen all at once. There was no epic moment, no sweeping declaration, no meeting in the rain. It was all much simpler, much more real, and perhaps for that reason, much more beautiful. It started with small details, those that most people don't even notice, but that for those paying attention mean everything. Ethan started leaving notes. Nothing grand, nothing that could be misinterpreted, just a thank you, handwritten on the library table after Aurora organized his books, a discreet good morning when they crossed paths in the hallway, a cup of coffee he left in the kitchen with a yellow post-it, for you too. Aurora kept these notes in her apron pocket, and every time she touched them throughout the day, she felt a strange warmth rising through her chest. It wasn't passion, not yet, but it was something like hope. Have you ever noticed how sometimes someone pays attention to a detail that nobody ever noticed in you? How that changes everything? Aurora had a habit of arranging the entrance vase flowers always the same way. The tallest in the center, the delicate ones on the edges, a symmetry only she understood. One day, she arrived in the morning and saw that someone had rearranged them. Her heart tightened, not with anger, but with disappointment, as if that small ritual she had created had been violated. But when she went to arrange them again, she found a note from Ethan. "Sorry, I tried to imitate, but it didn't turn out like you do it. You have a special way with things." Aurora needed to sit down, needed to breathe deeply, because nobody, absolutely nobody, had ever noticed that. And suddenly, she was no longer invisible. She was seen. And being seen, she was discovering, was both terrifying and liberating. They didn't approach each other by destiny. It was more like two people tired of the noise, finding a quiet corner to breathe. The Moreau mansion was too big, too full of expectations and performances. But there was a place, the library on the second floor, the one nobody used because the Moreaus weren't people who read for pleasure, that became a refuge for both. Aurora would go there to clean, but always lingered. She ran her fingers over the book spines, read titles in a low voice, imagined the stories that lived between those pages. And Ethan started to notice, started arriving earlier, sitting in the armchair near the window with an open book in his lap, but his eyes always drifting to her. Until one day, he broke the silence. "Do you like to read?" Aurora froze, looked at him, and for the first time since entering that house, she answered not as a maid, but as herself. "I do. Books are the only places where I can be anyone." Ethan smiled. It was a small smile, almost shy, but real. "Me too." And then he did something that changed everything. He took a book from the shelf, The Little Prince, extended it to her, and said, "Take it. Read it whenever you want, and tell me what you think." Aurora held the book as if it were made of crystal. Not because it was expensive, but because it was his. Because he was trusting her with something that mattered. Because for the first time, someone wasn't asking her to serve, they were asking her to share. That night, Aurora read the entire book under the thin covers of the maid's room with an old flashlight she had brought from home. And when she finished, she cried. Not from sadness, but from that kind of crying that comes when something inside you finally finds words. The next day, she returned the book to Ethan. And when their fingers touched, for just a second, by accident, or maybe not, they both felt it. That soft electricity, that silent recognition, that frightening certainty that something was beginning and there was no going back.
The approach between Aurora and Ethan didn't happen all at once. There was no epic moment, no sweeping declaration, no meeting in the rain. It was all much simpler, much more real, and perhaps for that reason, much more beautiful. It started with small details, those that most people don't even notice, but that, for those paying attention, mean everything. Ethan started leaving notes. Nothing grand, nothing that could be misinterpreted, just a thank you, handwritten on the library table after Aurora organized his books. A discreet good morning when they crossed paths in The real conversations always happened when the rest of the mansion was asleep. It was as if the night were a cloak protecting them both, a space where the rules didn't count as much, where Aurora could go down the stairs without fear of being reprimanded, and Ethan could leave his room without needing to justify where he was going. It all started on a dawn when Aurora couldn't sleep. She went down to the kitchen to make tea, chamomile with honey, the same her mother made when she was a child, and found Ethan sitting at the table with a cup of cold coffee between his hands and his gaze lost in the window. They startled at the same time. Aurora thought about apologizing and leaving. Ethan thought about inventing some formal excuse, but neither did that. Instead, he asked, "You can't sleep either?" And she, with a sincerity that surprised her, replied, "Sometimes I feel I sleep better when I'm too tired to dream." Ethan understood. He didn't need long explanations, detailed contexts. He just understood, because he also knew that kind of exhaustion, not the physical, but the emotional, the one that makes you want to turn off your head just so you don't have to think about everything that's wrong. They stayed there, in the kitchen's half-light, drinking their drinks in silence for a few minutes. And then, as if something had broken, Ethan started talking. He told her about the pressure of being an only child, the weight of carrying a surname that was bigger than him, the feeling of always disappointing someone, the father who wanted a ruthless heir, the mother who wanted a perfect son, himself who just wanted to be normal. Aurora listened to everything without interrupting, and when he finished, she said something Ethan would never forget. Sometimes, we open up more with someone we barely know because that person expects nothing from us. That's how the dawns became routine. Not every night, but on nights when the silence weighed too much, when the world seemed big and suffocating at the same time. Aurora would come down. Ethan would come down. And there, in that space between sleep and wakefulness, the two began to truly know each other. Not the versions they presented to the world, the efficient maid, the composed heir, but the real, raw, vulnerable versions. Aurora told about the father she never knew, about the mother who worked double shifts and still found time to hug her before sleeping, about the dreams she kept in a drawer because there was no space to dream when the electric bill was late. Ethan told about the loneliness of growing up surrounded by people, about family dinners that seemed like business meetings, about the feeling of always playing a role he didn't choose. And together, without realizing it, they built something rare, a safe space, a place where they could take off their masks and simply exist. They were like two windows open to different sides of the world, but with the same wind passing between them. Aurora saw life from below, the hard ground, the constant effort, the daily struggle for dignity. Ethan saw life from above, the high ceiling, the crushing expectation, the golden prison. But the wind passing between them was the same, the search for belonging, the desire to be understood, the need to feel that someone, somewhere, truly cared. They started sharing small things,
Ethan brought new books for Aurora, not the pompous classics that decorated the library, but simple, exciting stories that he thought she would like. Aurora brought her mother's recipes, cheese bread, cornmeal cake, and made them for him in the dawns, filling the kitchen with the smell of home, of affection, of something that mansion never had. And gradually, without announcing, without planning, they became accomplices, partners in a silent rebellion against the world that insisted on separating them. But there was something more growing there, something neither dared to name but both felt. It was in the looks that lasted a second longer, in the smiles that appeared for no apparent reason, in the way Ethan rested his hand on the table, near hers, never touching but leaving the possibility in the air, in the way Aurora held her breath when he came close, as if her body knew something her mind still refused to acknowledge. They were dangerously approaching the invisible line that separates friendship from something more, and both knew that crossing it would change everything. But perhaps, just perhaps, it was already too late to go back. Because some things, once felt, cannot be unfelt. Some connections, once created, cannot be undone. And what was growing between Aurora and Ethan, in those stolen dawns, in those honest conversations, in that complicity nobody saw, was bigger than both of them. And more frightening, too.
Helena Moreau wasn't a woman who let things go unnoticed. She had that kind of sharp, surgical attention that noticed everything. A cushion out of place, a smile at the wrong time, a silence that lasted too long. And it was precisely a silence that made her suspicious. Ethan was different. Less distant, less bored. He smiled more, came down for breakfast without being called, spent less time locked in his room. For any other mother, this would be cause for relief. But Helena wasn't any mother. She was a woman who built an empire alongside her husband, who learned early that affection was a luxury and control was survival. And when she realized her son was escaping her control, something inside her ignited. Not love, but fear. Fear of losing influence. Fear that Ethan would make decisions on his own. Fear that he would choose to feel instead of obey. It was on a Thursday night that Helena saw. She came down to get a glass of water, or that's what she told herself, but the truth is she was restless, sensing something in the air. And there they were, Aurora and Ethan, sitting at the kitchen table, laughing softly at something she couldn't hear. They weren't touching, they weren't doing anything improper, but Helena saw. She saw the way he looked at her. She saw the way she lowered her eyes but smiled. She saw the intimacy, the complicity, the familiarity. And that was like a slap in the face, because Helena knew that look. It was the same one she had seen in the mirror decades ago when she was young and naive enough to believe that love mattered more than status. She learned the hard way that it didn't, and she wasn't going to allow her son to make the same mistake. Who hasn't been afraid of losing something good because of other people's opinions? That fear that tightens your chest, that makes you question whether what you feel is real or madness, whether it's worth risking everything for something the whole world will judge. Aurora felt that fear the instant she saw Helena standing in the kitchen doorway with that icy look, that impeccable posture, that silence that said everything without needing to say anything. She jumped up, almost knocking over the chair, her heart beating so hard it felt like it would explode. She mumbled an excuse. He asked, But Helena didn't let her finish. Go to your room, Aurora, now. Her voice was calm, too calm. It was the kind of calm that precedes the storm. Ethan tried to speak, tried to explain, but his mother's look cut him like glass. You too, Ethan. We'll talk tomorrow. And there was no room for discussion, no room for anything but obedience. Aurora didn't sleep that night. She lay in the narrow bed of the maid's room, staring at the cracked ceiling, feeling the world collapse bit by bit. She knew it wasn't going to end well. She knew that crossing that line was dangerous. But a part of her, that silly, dreaming part, desperate to be happy, had believed that maybe, just maybe, the world could be different. That maybe love would be enough, that maybe she deserved to be seen as more than the girl who cleans. But reality is cruel to those who dream too high. And that night, Aurora understood that no matter how much Ethan liked her, no matter how much the two connected, in the eyes of the Moreau family, she would always be inferior, always inadequate, always just the maid. It was as if someone turned off the light in the middle of the best moment of the movie. Everything was starting to make sense. Everything was starting to seem possible. And then suddenly, darkness, silence, the end. Aurora cried that night. She cried softly, with her face buried in the pillow so nobody would hear, because even the right to cry aloud had been taken from her. She cried for what she was losing before even having it for real. She cried for Ethan, who would wake up the next day and be suffocated by family expectations. She cried for herself, for being naive enough to believe that someone like her could belong to a world like that. And she cried because, deep down, she knew the worst was yet to come. Because Helena Moreau wasn't the type of woman who left things like this. She acted. And when she acted, Aurora knew there would be no room for choice, no room for fight, only separation and pain, and the horrible feeling that the best of your life ended before it even began.
The conversation happened the next morning, before the sun fully rose. Helena called Aurora to the office, that imposing room full of dark wood furniture and family portraits that seemed to judge you from the walls. Aurora entered with trembling hands, dry mouth, her heart pounding so loud she was sure Helena could hear it. The matriarch was sitting behind the desk, upright posture, hands interlaced, serene expression. But there was something in her eyes, something cold, calculated, relentless, that made Aurora feel as if she were before a judge about to pronounce a sentence. "Sit down," said Helena, and it wasn't an invitation, it was an order. Aurora obeyed, because that was the only thing she knew how to do there. Obey, serve, disappear when necessary. Helena didn't waste time with beating around the bush. She was efficient, pragmatic, the type of person who saw problems as equations to be solved. You're a good employee, Aurora. Discreet, efficient, hardworking. That's why I'm going to be honest with you. She paused, measuring her words like someone choosing ammunition. Whatever is happening between you and my son needs to stop, now. Aurora opened her mouth to speak, but Helena raised her hand, cutting off any attempt at defense. I'm not interested in what you feel. I'm not interested if he reciprocates. What interests me is only this. You're here to work. Ethan is here to assume responsibilities that are bigger than any distraction. The word came out poisoned, as if what Aurora and Ethan had built were something dirty, wrong, disposable. So here's what's going to happen. You have two options. You leave on your own, with a recommendation letter and 3-month salary in advance. Or I fire you for cause, and you leave here with nothing but the clothes on your back. Choose. Have you ever had to walk away from someone not for lack of love, but for lack of choice? That feeling of powerlessness, of knowing that no matter how much you fight, the game is already decided against you from the start. Aurora felt that. She felt the ground disappear from under her feet. She felt her throat close, her eyes burn, her chest compress as if someone had taken all the air out of the room. She wanted to scream. She wanted to say that Helena had no right to decide this for her, that what she and Ethan had was real, that love doesn't choose social class. But the words wouldn't come out, because Aurora knew reality. She knew the weight of money, the power of appearances, the cruelty of a system that always favored those who already had everything. She looked at Helena, that woman who had everything except empathy, and understood there was no possible fight there, no victory, only survival. "I'll leave," Aurora murmured, her voice breaking in the middle. "But it's not because I want to, it's because you leave me no choice." Helena showed no remorse, no relief. She just nodded, like someone confirming that a problem had been solved. "Good. You have until noon tomorrow to pack your things and leave. And Aurora." She leaned slightly forward, her eyes fixed on hers with frightening intensity. "Don't try to talk to Ethan. Don't try to say goodbye. If I find out you exchanged even one word, the deal is canceled. Understood?" Aurora swallowed the cry rising in her throat, nodded, and stood up. She left that room like someone leaving a funeral, of something that died before fully blooming. And Ethan, meanwhile, faced his own hell. Vitor Moreau wasn't a man of shouts. He used silence as a weapon, disappointment as punishment. He called his son to the office right after Aurora left, and what followed was a conversation Ethan would never forget. "I disappoint you, Ethan," Vitor began, his voice low, controlled, lethal. "I gave you everything. Education, opportunities, a name worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. And you repay me by embarrassing me with a maid." Ethan tried to react, tried to defend Aurora, tried to say she was more than that, but Vitor interrupted him with a look that clearly said, "Don't test me. You think this is love? Think it's special? It's naivety. It's teenage rebellion disguised as feeling. You'll get over this. And you'll do it away from her." What was home became a labyrinth. Ethan was forbidden to leave his room except for family meals, which became sessions of silent torture where Helena and Vitor looked at him as if he were a walking disappointment. He tried to look for Aurora. He tried to go down to her room but found the door locked. He tried to send notes, but the housekeeper intercepted everything. He tried to wait in the kitchen during the dawn, but Aurora didn't appear, because she already knew. She had already understood that approaching him now would be worse for both, so she did the only thing she could do. She disappeared. She packed her few things in her worn backpack, kept the notes that he had written for her, those little pieces of paper that were now all that remained, and left through the back door before sunrise, without looking back, because if she looked, she wouldn't have the strength to leave. And Ethan woke up that morning to a different silence. A silence that hurt. A silence that had the shape of absence. He went down to the kitchen and didn't find her. Went to the library and didn't see her arranging the books. He asked the housekeeper, who simply said, with cruel indifference, "The girl left." 2 words, 4 syllables, and Ethan's world collapsed. He ran up to the maid's room, opened the door, which was now unlocked because there was nothing left to protect, and found only an empty room. The bed made, the window closed, no trace that Aurora had been there, no trace that she existed, except the book, The Little Prince, left on the pillow with a folded note inside. Ethan picked it up with trembling hands, opened it, and read, "Thank you for seeing me, even if it was just for a moment. Aurora." And then, for the first time since he was a child, Ethan Moreau cried. The days that followed were the longest of Ethan's life. He woke up, dressed, went down for breakfast, had lunch with the family, pretended to listen to his father talk about business, pretended to agree with his mother about social commitments. But inside, he was empty. It was as if someone had turned off all the lights inside him and left only the structure, functional, obedient, dead. Helena and Vitor thought they had won. They thought that with time, Ethan would forget, that it had been just a phase, a slip, something that would dissolve like mist under the morning sun. But they didn't understand one thing. When you spend your whole life pretending and suddenly find something real, there's no going back. There's no unlearning how to feel. There's no forgetting the taste of freedom. Aurora, meanwhile, returned to the life she had before the Moreau mansion. She returned to the small apartment with her mother, to sporadic odd jobs, to bills that never quite balanced. She returned to being invisible again. But this time, invisibility hurt differently, because now she knew what it was to be seen. She knew what it was to be important to someone. And knowing that and not being able to have it was a new cruelty. She tried to move on. She tried to get another job, keep her head busy, pretend everything was fine. But every time she saw a book, every time she made chamomile tea, every time she looked at the sky and thought about open windows and winds that connect different worlds, her chest tightened. And she wondered, does he think about me too, or has he already forgotten me? But Ethan hadn't forgotten. On the contrary, Aurora's absence was consuming him gradually like slow fire that burns from the inside out. He started questioning everything. He started looking at the life he led, the formal dinners, the empty commitments, the conversations that said nothing, and realizing that this wasn't life. It was just existence. It was doing what was expected, being who they told him to be, never choosing, never feeling, never living. And one night, alone in his room, holding Aurora's note between his fingers, something inside him broke. It wasn't anger. It wasn't despair. It was clarity. That cold, frightening, liberating clarity that comes when you finally understand enough. There comes a time when we realize that fear doesn't protect, it only imprisons, that living to please others is the slowest way to die, that security without freedom isn't security, it's just a pretty cage. Ethan understood this in the dawn of a Saturday, 3 weeks after Aurora left. He went down to his father's office, that place that had always intimidated him, full of corporate trophies and portraits of severe ancestors. And for the first time in his life, he didn't ask permission. He just entered. Vitor there, reviewing documents, and raised his eyes with that expression of someone expecting obedience. But what he saw on his son's face made him pause. Because Ethan no longer had that resigned, defeated look. There was something new there, something dangerous. Determination. "I'm going after her," Ethan said, without preamble, without fear. Vitor put down his pen, his jaw stiffening. "Ethan, we've already talked about this. This matter is closed. For you, maybe. Not for me." Ethan's voice was firm, firmer than he himself expected. "I spent my whole life doing what you wanted. I studied where you told me. I dressed how you demanded. I smiled at the right people, said the right words, pretended to be happy when I was dying inside. But I won't do that again. Not with her." Vitor stood up, his voice rising in tone. "Are you willing to throw everything away? Your future, your name, your family? For a girl you barely know?" And Ethan, without hesitating, replied, "I know her better than I know anyone in this house, including you." The silence that followed was heavy, dense, loaded with everything that had never been said between father and son. Vitor looked at Ethan as if seeing a stranger, and maybe he was, because the obedient, moldable, controllable boy had disappeared. In his place, there was a man making his own decision for the first time in his life. "If you walk out that door," Vitor said, his voice low, threatening, "don't expect us to be here when you come back." Ethan breathed deeply. He nodded, and then said the words that changed everything. "I know, and I'm going anyway." Aurora was in the apartment kitchen helping her mother fold clothes when she heard the doorbell ring. It was late, almost 10 at night, and they never received visitors at that hour. Her mother went to answer, and she heard muffled voices, and then the sound of footsteps. She looked up, and the world stopped. Because Ethan was there, in the narrow hallway of her apartment, completely out of place with his expensive clothes and his tired face, but with his eyes shining with something she hadn't seen in weeks: hope. "Aurora," she whispered, her voice failing. "What are you doing here?" He took a step forward, his hands trembling slightly. "I came to apologize for not fighting before, for letting them take you away from me, for being a coward." Aurora shook her head, tears already falling. "You weren't a coward, you had no choice." "We all have a choice," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "And I choose you. I choose this. Whatever this is, Aurora, I choose." They chose what hurt less, fighting for each other instead of losing themselves, because in the end, the pain of trying and failing was still less than the pain of never having tried. Aurora looked at Ethan, at that man who had everything and was willing to risk losing it for her, for them, and finally allowed herself to believe. To believe that maybe, just maybe, love could be enough. Not to change the world, not to end inequality or erase differences, but to give them the courage to face all of this together. She took a step forward, then another, and when they were finally close enough to touch, she extended her hand, and he held it, tight, like someone holding the only real thing they've ever had. There's a difference between being together and belonging together. Aurora and Ethan learned this in the months that followed. It wasn't easy. It never is when you choose a path nobody approves of, that nobody understands, that everyone says is wrong. Ethan was disinherited, not officially, not on paper, but in Helena's cutting silence, in Vidor's calculated indifference, in the absence of calls, of invitations, of any recognition that he was still part of that family. He got a simple job at a small company, earning a fraction of what he would have inherited. He rented a modest apartment, nothing compared to the mansion, but with windows that let the sun in, and that, somehow, made all the difference. And Aurora? Aurora went back to studying. Ethan insisted. He said she deserved more than cleaning houses for the rest of her life. Not because there was shame in it, but because he saw in her something she herself had forgotten. Potential, dreams, future. They built something new. Something that didn't look like the stories Aurora had read in books, where the poor girl marries the prince and becomes a princess, and everything resolves in the blink of an eye. Their life was more real, more difficult, more honest. There were bills to pay. There were arguments about money. There were nights when exhaustion weighed so much they could barely talk. But there was also breakfast made together, books read aloud before sleep, silly laughter in the middle of the night, that kind of complicity that only those who fought side by side can build. And gradually, Aurora realized something. She didn't need to become a princess. She just needed to be seen, to be heard, to be loved exactly as she was. And Ethan? He realized that inheriting a name had never been the same as having an identity, that being free was worth more than being rich, that choosing who you love is the only inheritance that truly matters. Social differences didn't disappear. They were still there, in the way some people looked at them when they discovered the story, in the way the Moreau family pretended Ethan didn't exist, in the way Aurora still felt, sometimes, that she wasn't good enough. But the difference now is that they had something stronger than other people's judgment. They had authenticity. They had truth. They had a connection built not on appearances or conveniences, but on something rare, precious, non-negotiable. The mutual recognition of two souls who truly saw each other. And that, they discovered, creates bridges that no inequality can tear down. Because in the end, what unites people isn't having the same bank account, the same surname, the same origin. It's having the same courage. The courage to choose, to feel, to fight for what matters, even when nobody applauds. We don't control who we get close to. Sometimes love comes from where we least expect, in a look exchanged in the kitchen, in a conversation stolen at dawn, in a note left on the table. We don't ask permission to feel. We don't choose when the heart recognizes someone. But we do choose, yes, what we do with it. We choose whether we'll have the courage to fight, to face fear, to give up comfort for the risk of being truly happy. Aurora and Ethan chose. And that choice, the most difficult, the most frightening, the most beautiful, changed everything. It didn't change the world. It didn't end inequality. It didn't make the Moreau family accept. But it changed them. And sometimes, that's enough. She entered to tidy a house, he to escape his own. In the end, they found a place where both fit. It wasn't a marble mansion, nor a fairy tale palace. It was just a small apartment, with windows facing the street, with noisy neighbors, with leaks when it rained hard. But it was theirs, built not with inheritance, but with choice. Not with obligation, but with love. And in that tight space, in that corner of the world that nobody thought was special, Aurora and Ethan finally learned what it means to belong. Not to a place, not to a social class, but to each other. And that, they discovered, was the only home that truly mattered. There's a difference between being together and belonging together. Aurora and Ethan learned this in the months that followed. It wasn't easy. It never is when you choose a path nobody approves of, that nobody understands, that everyone says is wrong. Ethan was disinherited, not officially, not on paper, but in Helena's cutting silence, in Victor's calculated indifference, in the absence of calls, of invitations, of any recognition that he was still part of that family. He got a simple job at a small company, earning a fraction of what he would have inherited. He rented a modest apartment, nothing compared to the mansion, but with windows that let the sun in. And that, somehow, made all the difference. And Aurora? Aurora went back to studying. Ethan insisted. He said she deserved more than cleaning houses for the rest of her life, not because there was shame in it, but because he saw in her something she herself had forgotten. Potential, dreams, future. They built something new, something that didn't look like the stories Aurora had read in books, where the poor girl marries the prince and becomes a princess, and everything resolves in the blink of an eye. Their life was more real, more difficult, more honest. There were bills to pay. There were arguments about money. There were nights when exhaustion weighed so much they could barely talk. But there was also breakfast made together, books read aloud before sleep, silly laughter in the middle of the night, that kind of complicity that only those who fought side by side can build. And gradually, Aurora realized something. She didn't need to become a princess. She just needed to be seen, to be heard, to be loved exactly as she was. And Ethan, he realized that inheriting a name had never been the same as having an identity. That being free was worth more than being rich. That choosing who you love is the only inheritance that truly matters. Social differences didn't disappear. They were still there, in the way some people looked at them when they discovered the story, in the way the Moreau family pretended Ethan didn't exist, in the way Aurora still felt, sometimes, that she wasn't good enough. But the difference now is that they had something stronger than other people's judgment. They had authenticity. They had truth. They had a connection built not on appearances or conveniences, but on something rare, precious, non-negotiable. The mutual recognition of two souls who truly saw each other. And that, they discovered, creates bridges that no inequality can tear down. Because in the end, what unites people isn't having the same bank account, the same surname, the same origin. It's having the same courage. The courage to choose, to feel, to fight for what matters, even when nobody applauds. We don't control who we get close to. Sometimes love comes from where we least expect, in a look exchanged in the kitchen, in a conversation stolen at dawn, in a note left on the table. We don't ask permission to feel. We don't choose when the heart recognizes someone. But we do choose, yes, what we do with it. We choose whether we'll have the courage to fight, to face fear, to give up comfort for the risk of being truly happy. Aurora and Ethan chose. And that choice, the most difficult, the most frightening, the most beautiful, changed everything. It didn't change the world, it didn't end inequality, it didn't make the Moreau family accept, but it changed them. And sometimes that's enough. She entered to tidy a house, he to escape his own. In the end, they found a place where both fit. It wasn't a marble mansion, nor a fairy tale palace. It was just a small apartment, with windows facing the street, with noisy neighbors, with leaks when it rained hard. But it was theirs, built not with inheritance, but with choice, not with obligation, but with love. And in that tight space, in that corner of the world that nobody thought was special, Aurora and Ethan finally learned what it means to belong, not to a place, not to a social class, but to each other. And that, they discovered, was the only home that truly mattered.